Hello everyone and welcome to episode 4, all about sleep. And to introduce this podcast, I will hand it over to Minal.
Yay, so we're talking about sleep today. I'm really passionate about sleep, only because I've learned over the past few years how much sleep impacts our health. So the National Sleep Foundation recommends 7 to 9 hours of sleep of people aged between 18 and 64. But around 40% of UK adults struggle with sleep almost on a weekly basis. And a recent UK Gov survey that's been looking at sleep since July 2019 up until August this year has shown that 40% of people are sleeping less than 6 hours. So there's definitely a struggle out there. People are not sleeping enough. And yeah, we're going to talk about why it's important. And also, interestingly, in studies, it's found that women struggle more with sleep than men, which is interesting.
Okay, so how many hours do you reckon you get per night?
I would say I average around 7. I'm quite lucky. When I manage to get to sleep, I do tend to sleep, 7.5 hours, which is what I aim for. If I get any less, I am grumpy, I'm miserable. Yeah, it's the worst. So I prioritize sleep purely for that.
Everyone's sake.
Exactly.
So what happens when we're sleeping? Why do we sleep?
Well, sleep impacts every organ of the body, every system of the body. And for a long time, scientists were always looking at, the reason for sleep. A lot of people thought, oh, sleep is just a waste of time. A lot of leaders, a lot of US presidents, and I think Margaret Thatcher, and apparently only managed like on 4 hours sleep, which sounds crazy.
Horrific.
I know, like hell. But there's so much that goes on while we sleep. So in the brain, for example, the brain is super active when we're sleeping. It goes through this process of almost a little bit like when you go to the hygienist and have your teeth cleaned when all the plaque is removed. When you sleep, when we sleep, the brain gets a similar sort of cleanse, if you like, of this plaque that builds up. And recent studies have shown that there is a potential link between a buildup of that plaque and the risk of things like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. So that's really interesting. The brain also collates all our memories and sorts them out. There's a lot of studies that have looked at people who are revising for an exam or want to retain certain information and have had sufficient sleep or have had a nap in the day, are able to retain that information better than those who are sleep deprived.
I think they did quite an interesting study on that. Sorry to interrupt, about giving sleep deprivation and no sleep deprivation and like retention of information sort of at the end of the week. What the difference was massive.
Yeah.
And they also gave them alcohol.
I wonder what that did.
It didn't have great effects.
Well, because I never did this because I could never stay awake, but a lot of people studying for exams tend to study all night and think, I'm just going to cram. But actually that's the worst thing you can do. It's better to just do what you can, read what you can, and then get a good night's sleep to effectively be able to retain the information that you've read rather than trying to remember it, having not had any sleep. So any students out there, take note. The other cool thing that I remember hearing about was, I don't know much about traditional Chinese medicine, but what I do know is that they, one of their sort of theories is something called like a medicine clock or a body clock, which essentially is every hour of the day is dedicated to sort of an organ of the body. And between 1 and 3 a.m., hopefully we're all asleep by then, the liver is the most active. It's when it's doing its detoxification. So it's funny when we talk about things like, get your beauty sleep. If according to this medicine clock, if we're getting enough sleep, then yeah, we're effectively detoxifying. So yeah, there's a whole load of stuff that's happening when we're sleeping. But what's really interesting actually is what happens when we don't get enough sleep, which is what we're going to come on to next.
Yeah. So what happens when you don't get enough, and what is not getting enough? How many hours would that be?
Well, the recommendation is 7 to 7 to 9 hours. And I think when we sort of look at studies, it's anything from sort of 6 hours and less, which is where the body starts to, things start to go wrong, essentially.
Like your immune system.
Yeah, that's one of the first things to go. And actually, I read Matthew Walker's book, Why We Sleep, which is a great resource for anyone who's kind of wanting to geek out on sleep. And he said that around 70% of your immune defenses will drop with, if you don't get sufficient sleep, which is huge. And that's just astounding. That's just after one night's sleep, one bad night of sleep, and 70% of your defenses are down. So immune function goes down. Your body's not able to repair as well. So it's what we refer to as sort of inflammation. That's sort of raised. We're not as effective as monitoring things like our blood sugar levels. So the risk of diabetes is increased. Things like concentration, mood, that's all impacted. And then things like certain hormones that are normally regulated really well, like our hunger hormones. So leptin and ghrelin, those are the hunger hormones. So leptin lets us know that we are full, and ghrelin is the hormone that tells us that we're hungry.
The hunger hormone.
The hunger hormone.
Gremlin.
Yeah, exactly. I like that. I like the analogy of that. And when you don't get enough sleep, those hormones are completely out of whack. So when your body should be telling you that you've had enough, it's not giving you the right signals. And instead, we tend to eat more. And actually, there was a study, again, a Matthew Walker study, or one that he has quoted in his book, where two groups of people who were put into the same room with a buffet of food, and those who hadn't slept as much were eating more food, didn't even realize it. So it's amazing how the body reacts when it hasn't had enough sleep. So there's so many factors into play.
Just an adjunct to that, if somebody's dieting, for instance, that your dieting won't go to plan if you're not getting enough sleep. You'll just pile the weight back on.
Yeah,
linked to all the hormones and everything. It's fascinating.
what was your sleep like?
It's generally pretty good. I have to say, I do prioritize it. I need my sleep. I get very grumpy if I don't get my sleep. I do need a good 8 hours. So ideally I would have a little bit more. But I'm definitely affected by stress. So we'll come on to things that you can do to help yourself. But I really do try to implement some techniques, hacks, whatever you want to call them, to kind of set myself up for a good night's sleep. So yeah. So why do you think people struggle to fall asleep?
Well, I was going to say stress is a massive one, and I think there was a US study that looked at how sleep has changed since the 70s. It was with things like tech, in the workforce, people are now, you don't just switch off, you come back and you can see emails on your phone and open up your laptop and you're exposed to all of that. Even just having social media and the news and all of those things, just we're bombarded, aren't we, in the day. And sleep, and actually the whole body is maintained by the circadian rhythm. And if that's disrupted, then you're not gonna hit the bed and fall asleep like you should. So when we were cavemen and cavewomen, we rose with the sun, we went to sleep when the sun went down, and that's how we should be living. But we are exposed to loads of light, loads of noise. We're eating too late, so we're going to bed feeling really full. We're drinking alcohol, which some people think aids sleep, but actually it doesn't. You don't get that deep sleep that you need.
And actually you wake up multiple times a night, even if you don't realize it, you are actually waking. And I think the interesting thing is about people think alcohol puts you to sleep, but actually it kind of sedates you instead. And then you don't have this restful night, because you're waking up lots of times, even if you don't realize it, and you wake up the next day feeling absolutely exhausted and you can't remember why. And it's because you've not actually had good sleep, and you're not getting the REM sleep.
Yep, it's the REM sleep that we need. Yeah, exactly. So a lot of people who rely on it, a lot of older people who rely on a nightcap, yeah, it's not doing you good. So
No. And the other thing to mention is caffeine. You know, it has a half-life of sort of 4 to 6 hours, and a half-life means the amount of time it takes for half of it to leave your system. So if it takes 4 to 6 hours for half of it to leave, there's still the other half in your system. So you need to be having your last cup around lunchtime. And it's actually really interesting what caffeine does. It blocks a sleepiness chemical in your brain called adenosine, and adenosine sort of gradually builds up throughout the day, and increases your desire to sleep, which is known as sleep pressure. The trouble is, caffeine blocks the receptor for that, but your adenosine has built up during the day, and it's still building up, when the caffeine's blocking the receptor. So when the caffeine wears off, you just get hit with this massive accumulation of adenosine, which hasn't gone anywhere. It's just waiting for the caffeine to move, and that's how you end up with a massive caffeine crash. I find all that absolutely fascinating.
yeah, it makes me laugh when some people say, oh, that doesn't affect me, I can drink a cup of tea at midnight and fall asleep. Yeah, no, it clearly does. It does affect you, and yeah, you don't get that deep sleep.
No.
As a result.
So the other thing to mention, I think, is screens. Why should we avoid screens before bed? What do they do?
Well, it goes back to this circadian rhythm, and waking with the sun, and sleeping when the sun goes down. If you're exposing your brain to light, you're manipulating it almost into thinking that it's daytime. So the body releases hormones to keep us, we have hormones that help us wake up in the morning, and those hormones are triggered by light. So if you imagine it's nighttime outside, but you're exposing yourself to light, yeah, your body is completely out of whack, and then a few minutes later you're trying to sleep and you can't. So yeah, screens are definitely a no-no, especially in the bedroom. We're in bad habits now where we have laptops and phones and things, and it's the blue light that is not good. That
it kind of acts as daylight, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's interfering with melatonin, and which we need for sleep, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
So just an adjunct, I suppose, to the blue light and social media, and actually social media can have other effects on your sleep in terms of fear of missing out and all the kind of the other stuff that goes alongside it, not just the light that it's emitting, but kind of you're allowing the outside world into your place where you're supposed to be resting and calming down and relaxing before getting a good night's sleep. And actually, if you're just scrolling through social media and seeing things that perhaps aren't conducive to sleep,
I think it's so interesting when you think about, maybe our grandparents' age or even our parents' age, where, there was a time where we weren't bombarded constantly by information. And we are still, as humans, we're still very much the same. We haven't got this capacity to take on all this information, and, it still affects us. And I think that's really interesting, looking at, how tech has gone up, and then people's sleep has just been disrupted as a result. So you're so right. Yeah, social media plays a big role, and we're starting to see how much, when there's such reliance on it, what it's doing to our mental health, what it's doing to our sleep. So
I thought that was interesting about. Did you watch the insomnia documentary?
I did, yeah.
And maybe you can discuss a little bit more about where they've linked insomnia to. But something I picked up from it was the fact that they didn't once mention social media, and the fact that they were all on their phones in the middle of the night. I thought that was quite interesting how that didn't get discussed.
Yeah, so the documentary was on BBC Three called Insomnia and Me, and I think she's a radio presenter, the lady who it was based on. But essentially what they did was they looked at her brain while she slept, and her brain was sort of 3 times more active than the average person. And the other thing that they linked it back to was a potential trauma that she maybe hasn't dealt with that could be a possible cause to the insomnia. So it's so interesting, when you look at it all.
It's a big
there's
picture,
so many elements at play here. But yeah, It is, and obviously as nutritionists, we would, if we were dealing with an individual, we'd look at, right, you know, how are they dealing with sleep, what else is going on in their lives. But you know, generally the advice is, yeah, you know, screens, keep away from screens. Yeah, social media is, you know, there's a time and place for it, of course. You know, we're
using it now,
we're using it now, yeah. But yeah, there's a time and place, and yeah, there's loads of other things you can do to kind of help. What would you recommend for people to help them sleep?
I think yeah, wearing blue light blocking glasses, I think that's really useful. So they have like very attractive yellow lenses, so you can look hot while you're doing it. So you know, in the afternoons, evenings, they're really useful. I think having a regular sort of nighttime routine, so your body knows it's preparing for sleep. So if that's, you know, having a bath with maybe some Epsom salts, which is magnesium sulfate, that can help sort of relax the muscles. Some people find weighted blankets really good for sleep. I think keeping any kind of electronics out of the bedroom if you can, turning off your Wi-Fi, at least on your, you know, on your phone. Yeah, how about you? What sort of things do you implement?
I really like having like a nighttime tea, so I'll have maybe fennel tea, or I might have mint tea, but also you can get like night blends. So valerian, for example, is a really nice herb that's sometimes included in nighttime sort of mixes. Ashwagandha you can take orally, but I think even just in your environment, you know, keep your bedroom just a space for sleep. Something that Matthew Walker talks about is almost kind of retraining your brain into thinking that the bed is only for sleeping, you know, so don't work on your bed or eat on your bed,
Yeah,
things like that. And routine is also, you know, you mentioned routine, but trying to stick to a wake time and a sleep time every day, so even at weekends, that will just, again, just train the body into knowing, okay, time to sleep, and hopefully, yeah, drifting off.
yeah, there's nothing worse than having a bad night's sleep, and I think you get stressed knowing that you're not sleeping, and stressed that you haven't had a good night's sleep. So if you can kind of have you know, you've got a routine in place, and that can almost be calming in itself. I think that's really useful. But you know, hit us up if you want more tips or support with your sleep or anything else. I hope you've learned a bit from today's podcast. Next time we will be discussing caffeine. So we've touched on it slightly, but we'll be going delving into that subject a bit more on our next episode. So if you're watching this on YouTube, please press like and subscribe, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks.